Morton.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker, and I rise to speak on the appropriation bills numbers 3 and 4 of 2015-2016. The appropriation bills are setting out basically the spending priorities of the Turnbull-Joyce government, what they consider to be most important. In my response, I'd like to focus particularly on education funding. I've had a couple of different careers before ending up in Parliament, but my 11 years as a teacher is what has informed me for choosing the topic for this appropriations response to the Turnbull-Joyce government priorities. As a teacher, I taught in public schools and also in private schools. I taught in regional areas, including up near Cairns, and also in the inner city in Brisbane. So from my time as a teacher, and then as a parent and as a Member of Parliament, I've always had a passion for education and the importance of education for every child, the gifted, the middle and those that need extra assistance. The Labor Party is my natural party because I believe passionately in the right of every Australian child to have access to a quality education, irrespective of the background of the child, irrespective of their economic circumstances or their location or the geography. In 2016, education should be the cornerstone for our social and democratic traditions. It is central to our economic success and future prosperity. And in terms of productivity gains, they will come through investing in education. The Gonski reforms, known by so many in the education sector, were based on a simple core principle that every child should get a great education, providing opportunity for all. And I thank, on the record, former Prime Ministers Kevin Rudd and Julia Gillard for their great legacy that came from their investment in the Gonski reforms. And remember, the Gonski reforms came from that focus on productivity. That's why we had a banker doing the analysis, not a teacher, not a social worker, but a banker. How can Australia do better in the future? Under Gonski, a nationwide funding standard was determined based on the cost of delivering a high-quality education for all children. And then additional resources were to be distributed on the basis of need, and future funding for schools was to be evidence-based. Now, we lost a bit of bark as a government when we brought in that evidence base, and I know NAPLAN is not perfect, but it is part of gathering that evidence. So irrespective of the sign above the school gate in my electorate or the 149 other electorates, children would receive funding based on need. So irrespective of the sign over the school gate, all would be treated the same when it came to evidence-based future funding. So the aim was to reverse sliding student performances and to close the gap between the educational haves and the educational have-nots. It is unacceptable that assessment results indicate currently a 2-year difference in mathematical performance dependent on how well off a student's parents are. Socioeconomic status should not be an albatross around the necks of our brightest children. Improving productivity, which is the only indicator of an economic engine running well, improving productivity demands that we bring on our brightest students. We should not condemn them because of their being Indigenous or rural and remote or coming from a culturally and linguistically diverse background or because of their economic status. So this is just one of the reasons that the Turnbull-Joyce government's decision to withdraw from the Gonski reforms is so disappointing. I'll say more than disappointing. I think it's actually gutless and deceitful to see such a backflip after the commitment that was given on the core flues in my electorate of Moreton, the member for Kingston's electorate. I'm sure there was commitments in those at the election saying we will fund Gonski in the years 5 and 6. If dollar for dollar on the same page, you've heard it all before, and then to do that gutless backflip cannot be forgiven, and nor will it be forgotten. If we don't get the fundamentals right in our schools, how can we aspire to a future that is innovative or agile? So all this talk about being innovative and agile and letting the ideas boom while you're underfunding, defunding and breaking your commitment is deceitful as far as I'm concerned. What is clear is that the Turnbull-Joyce government does not really care about our education system. We all heard their hollow promises before the 23rd election: no cuts to health, no cuts to education. We saw it on billboards, we saw it on call flues, we heard the Shadow Education Minister, Mr Pyne, say it. They talked about improving teaching training while simultaneously now ripping $80 billion out of the education system. Sorry, the $80 billion is out of health and education. I should get that right. But still, the budget papers from 2014 show an $80 billion cut to health and education and about $30 billion being ripped out of the education system. My home state of Queensland will be more than $6 billion worse off. In my own electorate of Moreton, schools will be over $179 million worse off. Each school will be on average $3.2 million worse off. These cuts are the equivalent of sacking 1 in 7 teachers, and if reversed would be enough to employ an extra 179 teachers in Moreton, and that would be for the next 10 years in Moreton electorate alone. Imagine what could happen with those extra teachers and educational workers in our schools. In Moreton, we saw about $1,000 per student per year in educational support cut, directly affecting over 32,000 students. And this is just one electorate. That number is incorrect. We saw about $1,000 per student per year in educational support. And this is just one electorate. Every student in every school will be worse off from these cuts: government schools, Catholic schools and independent schools. And the students who need the most help will be the ones hardest hit. In rural and remote schools that are rural and remote, schools with significant numbers of Indigenous Australians, schools with significant numbers of culturally and linguistically diverse students, and then obviously those in the poorest quintile as well. The Gonski funding model implemented by Labor also included loadings for students with disabilities, and $100 million was put forward by Labor as an interim measure to provide support for children with disabilities in schools as a consistent method of funding was determined, a figure which has unfortunately been stripped by the Turnbull-Joyce government. Making sure that students with disabilities are supported is the unfinished business of the Gonski reforms. Schools throughout my electorate are concerned about the reduced funding for children with disabilities, a funding differential that only becomes greater when higher levels of support are required. Students with disabilities need resources to level the learning playing field. They should have every opportunity, like all children, to reach their full potential. No, I know not every student is going to excel in education, but we can always lift their standards. Schools in Moreton are doing a remarkable job, despite the best efforts of this government to undermine their educational outcomes. Their spirit may be bruised by the disappointment of this reduced funding after that election commitment, but the children's education is not yet broken. The resilience of these hard-working parents and teachers never ceases to surprise and amaze me as I wander around my schools. The President of the Coopers Plains State School P&C, Katrina Marshke, says that their school, Coopers Plains, hosts events every term to assist with family participation. The program, aptly named Family Connection Program, offers both morning and night events so that they're accessible to all families, and I'm seeing the results flow in Coopers Plains State School. For the past 40 years, the PNF, the Parents and Friends Group at St Sebastian School at Yeronga, has hosted an art show. They raised $40,000 to $50,000 at this event and then put it back into wonderful events. The PNF president, Nathan Grunhurst, said last year they raised $50,000 for the school, and that money's been spent on things like a softball play area in the playground, bus transport for sporting events, an annual trip to Canberra, as I'm sure every MP would recognise, crucial for every student to understand our democracy. Also spend the money on before and after school sporting programs and school technology equipment. Mike Ennis, the hard-working principal of McGregor State School, praised the exemplary leadership of the current PNC president, of former PNC president YK Lau and Leanne Hill, the vice president. Mr Ennis said that the PNC have a close and respectful relationship with the school and school council, and they're all about maximising learning opportunities for the student. They've got businesses such as out-of-school hours care, the tuck shop and the uniform shop, and the money they generate from things such as the Mayfest is ploughed back into the school. And I wish the new president, Ken Howard, well. He's got very, very big shoes to fill, but I know, since he's such a big man, that he has big feet as well. The P&C are blessed with many volunteers, and I look forward to catching up with them at Mayfest. The Wellers Hill State School P&C also has some wonderful projects in train. Their before and after school care provides funding for many of these projects, such as the recent completed air conditioning at the school and the swim club. They've also recently received a grant to renovate their school hall. The P&F at St Elizabeth's, also in my electorate, but right on the border with Griffiths, has a huge agenda for the year, including their annual fete, with the theme this year is Celebrating Heroes. They've had a successful welcome function with 350 families attending, and they're soon holding a disco and later in the year a trivia night. And they're working on some projects to get some drinking taps for the children, including a building program to get some more covered areas. The Watson Road State School P&C in Acacia Ridge currently preparing for their AGM and focused on gaining a broader community cross-section as part of the executive. There's never great competition for leadership roles in these P&Cs and P&Fs, unfortunately. So some of their initiatives include revitalising the Healthy Tuck Shop, which is all about educating kids about foods, a refit of the facility and restarting the community garden after the very hot summer we've had in Brisbane. The Oxley State School P&C have also done some amazing work in the past year. They had their community festival in March, they installed some new sunshades as well as some traditional air conditioning in the admin block. And this year the P&C will fund some writing workshops for students to complement the school's particular focus on writing and literacy. They're also planning to install a fan in the big school hall, a very important part of the community, as we saw at the floods in 2011, where it was on the high ground, and that was a lot of people flocked to that to receive support. Not that I'm hoping there'll be any floods, but that's the reality of climate change, I guess. The hard-working parents from all these schools know the importance of education for their children. And I'd also particularly like to mention two other schools that I've had some contact with, St Brendan's at Maruka and also Yeronga State School, that I know are doing fantastic work. Of the more than 32,000 school students in my electorate, all will suffer because of the Abbott-Turnbull government, or the Turnbull-Joyce government's cuts to education. There's a community cost when these cuts are rolled out. The economic cost of failing to lift achievement for all students is significant. The OECD calculated that Australia will forego a GDP boost of 2.8% unless our students graduate high school with the foundational skills required for the global economy by 2030. That's roughly equivalent to $44 billion in today's term. It's the kind of figure that should make a Prime Minister, who supposedly prides himself on economic leadership, sit up, get out from under that table that he's cowering under, curled up in a ball sucking his thumb, and actually show some economic leadership. The government's $30 billion school cuts means that any student who falls behind is less likely to receive the support they desperately need to catch up. The educational impact of this can be carried forward not only through any remaining education but potentially into the workforce. Failing to properly invest in education funding lacks foresight. It's not about courage, it actually shows that you're not thinking of the economy. There's never been a more exciting time to be an Australian if you're not in the school system, because under Prime Minister Turnbull and Minister Birmingham, things are only set to go downhill from here. This educational leadership team is locking in mediocrity, systemic inequality and an uncertain future for our children. Labor has been and will continue to be the party of educational reform and investment. Labor's Your Child, Our Future policy will ensure the full implementation and funding of the Gonski reforms. It will see an additional investment in our education system of $37.3 billion over the decade. A world-leading and visionary education system is required to create our future teachers, our lawyers, our doctors, our engineers and leaders. Labor's Your Child, Our Future is a sound policy, not a political tactic or an election ploy. It has a strong focus on every single child's needs, more individual attention for students, better trained teachers, more targeted resources and better equipped classrooms, and more support for students with special learning needs. With Labor's policy, every Australian child will benefit. Labor's Your Child, Our Future policy is a significant investment in the future of Australia. So rather than put a $1,000 cut on the head of all 32,000 students in the electorate of Moreton, I ask the Turnbull-Joyce government to reconsider and invest in
One of the members'
education.
time has expired. I thank the